This is Anna, and this is Check It at the Round Table, where we discuss movies, books, music, and stuff. Today, we are discussing fear and travel. Okay, this is a weird combination, but I'm getting ready to travel internationally. I have never been on a plane yet, and so this is going to be quite exciting in many different ways. And I definitely will be taking my Dramamine with me, a lot of it, and Tums, because I had a friend tell me about the wonders of Tums recently, that it doesn't make you sleepy like Dramamine. I'm like, ooh, okay, I will try that. And they do not have that where I'm going, so I'm taking a big bottle. But anyway, travel and fear. I was born and raised in the US, in the middle of the country. It is a beautiful place to be raised, I will be the first to admit, but it is also led to some issues with regards to international travel because I have run into several different things growing up and being an adult in the Midwest, from the fact that, like, from the time you're 15 on, people are like, when are you going to start dating? When are you going to get married? When are you going to bear children? It's like, I don't know. And I really am not that concerned. Whether you asked me when I was 15 or whether you asked me in my 30s, it's like that will happen when it happens, or that won't. And either way, it will be okay. I'm like, what's the use of worrying about these kind of things? So anyway, but I've noticed here in the past year that as I get ready to leave the country, and probably for a long while, I'm thinking I'm going to be gone. I mean, my friends are like, Bonner, once you get over there, you will want to go back. They're like, we know you pretty well. And I don't think you'll want to go back to the States, because you'll be sitting there on the beach enjoying your tea and going, why would I want to go back to winters of minus 21 degrees Celsius, for example, or the inflation rate, or the cost of living in healthcare? I'm like, they're probably right. But again, I don't know yet. But in the midst of all this, most of my friends are like, Anna, you're going to have an awesome time. I've actually had some friends that are like, Anna, leave as soon as possible, because the sooner you leave, the sooner life will get infinitely better. I'm like, well, life is pretty good now, except for the fact that my cost of living went up 25% in the last 4 months with the inflation, which makes me a little ticked. I mean, my cost of, like, lodging went way down, but my cost of living, anyway. But the thing I find interesting is I've had some people say, you're leaving the US. The US is the safest place on earth, and you're leaving it. You could be kidnapped. You could get food poisoning. You could not be able to speak the language. You could, end up in a gutter in the dark. And I'm like, they have very vivid imagination. It reminds you of women when they tell you their birth stories, for example. I'm like, it's kind of the same vibe I'm getting, except these are usually guys. I haven't had one of my acquaintances Congo, I must give you the talk before you go to Asia. I'm going, I'm sorry, but I'm in my 30s. I think I've already had the talk. And if the talk involves you telling me of all the bad things that could happen, I'm going, I've heard it. And no offense, but I have weathered many, many bad things in my life, and I have survived them. And I do not think that anything that I will encounter on this journey that I'm taking would even come relatively close to the things that I have witnessed and dealt with and gone through and been resilient from. So I'm like, I really don't need you wasting your time on the talk, as it were. I mean, no offense, I rarely get that way, but I'm like, I don't need that in my life. You don't need that in your life. We're good friends, but if you give me this kind of talk, it might make me less friendly-ish feeling, if that makes sense. Just because I'm like, I don't need people naysaying when I've already decided to do what I'm going to do. I'm like, I've made up my mind. I made up my mind 4 years ago. I was going to do this because of COVID. It got delayed. So I'm like, I don't know what it's going to be like exactly, but I do know that I'm in a good situation for it. My ticket is purchased. My apartment month's rent for the first one is purchased. I have money in the bank. I have ample debit cards. If something goes wrong, I've got backups. I've got people I know in the country that will help me if I run into a glitch, but that's not going to really happen most likely. And I don't speak fluent languages in that country, but I do know enough to say sorry, thank you, and I'd like this, please. I mean, I will be fine. And there is a part of me that I'm going, you've never been on a plane. You've never even left the country. Granted, you spend most of your life teaching people from these countries, and you seem to get along very well with these people. So I do not think you're going to have major cultural barriers, except that they might look at you and go, oh, she's American, and then talk to you and go, oh, she's not the Americans we see in the news kind of Americans. I'm not trying to be bad. I'm just saying a lot of my students sit there and go, you all tweet like Donald Trump. I'm going, number one, I don't tweet. Number two, I would never treat like Donald Trump because ergo, I'm not Donald Trump. I mean, I don't mean it weird. I'm just going, not all Americans act like Donald Trump. Not to say anything bad about Mr. Trump. I'm just saying we don't all act like him. And my students are quite shocked to see that we are not all like Donald Trump. I even had one that told me they thought all Americans had guns, and I was going, I honestly cannot think of one person in my entire acquaintance that owns a gun. No, not one. Maybe it's just the people I know. But anyway, so I really don't see there being any major issues with this. So I'm going, the fear factor is not that big for me. Now, yes, will I maybe have to give myself a pep talk during the takeoff of the plane? Maybe, because I'm not really into amusement parks, and the idea of the plane shooting itself into the sky is a little disconcerting. And I have 3 of those before I get to my destination. But I'm going, after the first one, I should be okay. And no one's probably going to know that I'm stressed at all because I will have taken my Dramamine. I will be perfectly calm, and I will be probably holding my little squishy sushi. I'm just saying, I'll be fine. But, I think that fear, if we let it, can actually be one of our greatest motivators. And that's kind of what this podcast is about, because I know this has been a bit of a digression, but the things that have led me to this point, I think in many ways were some of the most difficult things I've ever gone through. Because when I was 27, I lost my dad. And granted, I could see that loss coming. So it wasn't like something that I wasn't prepared for, because he'd kind of been out of my life since high school, to be honest. But I can honestly say it was a done deal by the time, actually just before my 28th birthday. And so I'm like, that was hard because it was your dad. It's like, you don't want to lose people. You certainly don't want to lose your dad. But there are certain things which are beyond your control, and you sit there and go, I've got to deal with that. And so how do you deal with that? What do you do in response to that? I think for me, my main thing was, well, my dad is gone. There's nothing I can do about that, but I can be there for my mom and my sister as much as possible. Now, the thing that I was not counting on with this whole situation was the fact that I lost my mom when I was 30. And again, it was like, that one I really didn't see coming quite as much. I'm like, I didn't expect to lose my parents within 2 years of each other. I was like, this is just not something that you hope to have happen by the time you're 30. I mean, no offense, but I'm going, I don't think any of us sit there and go, oh, I hope I lose both my parents by the time I'm 30. I'm like, that is not something that's even on most of our radar. And I do realize that some people lose their children, lose their parents even in childhood. But I'm going, that was extremely difficult. And then we went right from me losing my mom to COVID and all that brought, which I'm like, honestly, COVID was nothing compared to that. I'm going, COVID, it's a bit of a pandemic. Yes, people are dying. Yes, this is something to be concerned about. But on the scale of 1 to 10 for me, I was like, I've always been a homebody, so COVID wasn't that big of a deal. But losing my parents, and then when that happened about a year later, I've lost, for all intents and purposes, at least right now, Bob. And, that was really, really hard. And that's still not really, there are some factors that I know that went into that now that I couldn't see back then, because honestly, that was a bit of a shocker to me, because I was going, everything seems the way it's always seemed, and then boom, it didn't. And I think, when things like that happen, and I will say, everything is like with my folks, that was not really explainable. With what happened with Bob, I'm like, we both lost our parents. We were both going through tremendous stress. We both had had things happen. And the other thing I think is we both dealt with those losses differently, because we were both very different people, and also we're a decade apart in age, which I'm not saying that gives you a different perspective on things, but I do think that in many ways, not because you're older and more mature at all, but because you lived and seen longer and you've witnessed more, I think it does change your perspective on certain things. And I mean, with the situation with Bob, I really don't see that as something that, it's like, that is a situation that is possibly temporal. It could be for good, it could not be for good. I really don't know. All I know is that at this point in time, that is something that is a loss. And that, I think, was the hardest one, because I'm like, you know, Bob was not only my sister, but she was my best friend. We actually started this podcast together, and I'm like, well, that hit me like a Mack truck, because I just really didn't see that one coming with everything else that had happened. And I really should have, because I'm like, if you read all the research out there, they're like, usually one traumatic event can trigger another traumatic event that you have to deal with, because it it just happens. And I'm like, I wish I had read those before that happened. I'm going, that would have been nice, but I didn't. And so I'm going, by the time I'm 31, I've lost both my folks and my sister's gone. And so I'm like, that made me have a lot of introspection. I'm like, no offense, I'm going, you know, all this stuff happened, and no, I do not blame myself for this stuff happening, and I do not blame Bob for this stuff happening either. I just am sitting there going, this stuff happened. So what do you do when that stuff happened? And I think for me, the thing that I really had to work on was, my modus operandi would be to avoid all kind of people contact, because that will avoid ever having something like this happen again. But the thing that I knew, in spite of my inner desire to avoid people contact, and it was the middle of a pandemic, but the thing that I knew is, I was like, I can't do that. That will not be healthy for me. That will not be healthy for the people who I am supposed to care for, both in the past and in the future. Because if I just cut off people contact, that will lead me to be in a state that is extremely unhealthy to be in. That will lead me to not care about the people I'm supposed to care about, or maybe to try to care about them in a protective mode, which is dangerous, because honestly, it's like I wrote in the More Than Conquerors book that I made years ago, but you can't protect everyone. You can't even protect yourself sometimes, but you can always let people know that you love them, that you care about them, that you are trying your best for them. That doesn't mean that everything will work out perfectly. It doesn't mean that sometimes things go to hell in a handbasket, as they say, but it does mean that you are doing your best for the people that you have, will, and do care for. And so I think for me, that was the main takeaway after all that stuff happened. Was, I knew there were many, many factors to all that, which is beyond this podcast. It really doesn't matter. It's not relevant. What matters is that I sat there and went, I don't want this to happen again. And one way that I can be sure to try to avoid having this happen again is to keep going, to continue on, to do things, to try to make the world better. So I helped start a nonprofit. I continued to teach English online. I decided to go ahead and go back to school. I decided to continue on with the podcast thing. That's what we're doing right now, because I was like, that is what I need to do. That is what I need to. It's like they say in Meet the Robinsons, we keep moving forward. We don't just stop. Now, were there days that I sit there and went, man, this is hard? Honestly, for me, it's not really days. It's like there'll be a moment in time where I sit there and go, darn, I wish that were different, but it's not. So moving on to the next thing. I mean, I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm simply sitting there and going, I never have seen the point on dwelling on the things that I can't change, which might be not positive in my life. So I'm like, what can I do that's positive? What can I make a change on? And for me, I was going, to me, it makes a lot of sense to move abroad, to move over to Asia, because number one, my cost of living would go down tremendously. Number two, it is a much less stressed environment than living in the States. Now, I have to say, my life in the States has been, in the last few years, other than, of course, those major issues of losing your parents and losing Bob, I'm like, other than that, it has been pretty unstressful. And also, I used to work for another company, but I decided to go to teaching English full time, and life went markedly de-stressed when I did that too. Now, I also took a significant pay cut in order to do that, but I was like, I would rather even make half my income that I was making and be in a better place than to make the income that I was making and be in a stressful situation, because I know what that can cost people. And so I was like, I'm moving. I'm moving to Asia, and I'm in a place in my life where I'm going, I'm not in any relationships that are romantical, and all my friends I can keep in touch with via online. It's not like that's going to be stopping me. And I do want to adopt in the next few years. And if that is the case, then I have to save money in order to do that. And also, I want to bring them into a really beautiful world and a good home. And I'm going, I can get a much nicer home abroad than I ever could in the States. And now, granted, I've heard people say, well, if you wait to adopt the kids and you get married, then you will have a more steady and substantial income on which to bring them into this world. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I'm not looking for a relationship for financial stability, because one of the things that I'm really is important to me is that I can take care of those I care about without having to depend on someone else. Now, I know that seems kind of strange, and I'm not a what do you call it, an extreme feminist at all. But I have seen in my life, through my own experience, how people can sit there and go, I think it's kind of unfair to depend on people to that extent. I think that you should be able to take care of yourself, and also, in my case, take care of my children without the need to be married. I mean, if I do get married, that will be great, but I will not be getting married for that reason, if that makes sense. So I think that for me, my life goals that I want to achieve, it will be much more achievable and conducive to do so being abroad than being in the US, at least at this point in my life. Now, I think that I will probably have a small home here in the States that I can return to sometimes to catch up with friends, do whatever I need to do, etc. But I'm going, that is my that is how I will achieve my plan. And I think also the main concern for me, if you will, or what I would call the main fear that I deal with this issue, is I'm one of those people that I really like stability. Stability is very important for me. Stability is nice. It is solid. It is determined. I like stability. And I don't think, I've thought about it and going, is it because I'm an oldest? Maybe it's because I'm an oldest. That could be. Is it because of my life experience so far? That could be it too. But I also think, and could it be the high functioning autism? that could definitely be the case. But I think that the issue for me is I'm sitting there, and I was actually just talking with one of my friends about this, but I was like, you know, the main concern for me is like I'm going to one country here for a month. I have my apartment, everything's taken care of, it's smooth sailing. But my one concern for me is like, where will it be the following month? Do I stay in that country? Do I go to another country that's infinitely cheaper that gets me a nicer apartment? But then I have to worry about getting that extended visa and all that rigmarole and my mind just starts reeling. I'm going, I don't know where I'm going to be after January. Breathe, stay calm. Because I'm one of those people who's like, I have a 5-year plan. Actually, I have a 130-year plan, but a lot of it's still up in the air and vague, and that is distressing because I'm like, I would much rather know what will happen. I'm like, I'd much rather know that, I will be in the next place for 25 years and I will have my home here, and my children and I will meet one another and they will be adopted in 2026, and this is how it will be. And, all that lining up. Now, with my possible significant other, I'm like, that I've kind of just, I'm not trying. I'm like, I put that clear over here. And I'm like, I'm not even making statistical chances on that because at this point it seems very slim. Although my friends are like, you'll go to Asia and you'll meet the one. I'm like, how will I meet the one? Will they have a big sticker on their forehead that says the one? I'm like, that just seems kind of weird to me. I'm like, I'm not going to Asia to meet the one. Because honestly, even if I met the one, that doesn't mean that I'm the one for them because I might not have the matching forehead sticker. I mean, really. So I'm going, there's just too many variables there. And that is something that I'm like, I don't handle that variable well. And I know that about myself. So I'm like, that statistical chance is going over here. I'm not worrying about that vagary because it may or may not ever happen. And why worry about something that may or may not ever happen? The kids I know will happen. I just don't know what year. And I'm saying you're going, I wish I knew. I wish I had a crystal ball that I could look into and go, it all makes sense. But I don't. So right now I'm sitting there going, my main fear, if you want to call it a fear, which I really don't even think it's that fearful, but I'm sitting there going, I don't know where I'm going to be after January. Will I be in this country? Will I be in that country? Will I decide to try to get an extension because I find this country so amazing and they have great tea and food and we're going, Anna, you haven't even been there yet. And like, I have not been there yet, but I know that I will probably really, really like it there. But I'm like, the unknowns are what can make you fearful. So what do you do about these fears? Like with this travel thing? Because I'm like, that's something that I think is a good question to ask. And I think for me, the main thing that I do is I sit there and go, you don't have to know it all. It's like I pull my opposite self out for me and I'm going, you don't need to have a plan for everything on it. You can, make sensible decisions, make rational choices, but at the end of the day, you don't need to have it all figured out because honestly, I don't think we ever will have it all figured out. I think we can do our best. I think we can mitigate problems, find solutions, sort everything. I mean, like right now, my office is an absolute disaster over here. Good thing you guys can't see it, but I literally have a stack of stuff which I'm like, this is supposed to go with me. That is not going to fit in the freaking suitcase that is only supposed to weigh 20 gigs. I'm like, that is not going to happen. And I know that mentally, but I'm sitting there going, is there any way I can shove it in somehow and then get it from that country to the next country? And the answer is no, there's not. But thankfully, one of my friends is like, Anna, what you cannot take with you, you can put in a box and I can ship it to you. And I'm like, yes, you can. When I get settled, you can ship it to me. And then I know I will still have these things, which I probably can get over there way cheaper, but they are not my exact things. Ergo, I want them. But anyway, I'm sorry, I had to make a quick phone call. But the thing I think with travel and with the fear of the unknown, as it were, is to just sit there and go, you don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to even know everything you need to know before you do need to know everything you need to know, but you don't have to understand it all, because I think, sometimes the best parts of our journeys are the things that we don't plan, the things that we don't know, as it were, the things that come along and shock us to bits, but are in a good way, not in a bad way. I'm just saying. But anyway, so that is what I'm looking forward to on this journey, because I'm going, there are a lot of things I don't know. But the one thing I do know is I'm supposed to do this. I'm like, I've been planning this for a while. Everything's in order. Everything's taken care of. I mean, yeah, my office is a disaster right now, but that will remedy itself in the next couple of days. And I'm going, it's all coming together. And it's like my work I can do anywhere, my school I can do anywhere. And so at the end of the day, that's what I'm going to do. Because I'm like, I spent a lot of my life waiting for things to happen when I was growing up and until I was in my early 30s. And I mean, the one thing that I realized is that sometimes you don't get second chances on things. Sometimes you don't get a chance to redo things. And not that I have really any major regrets with how I live my life. I mean, there are a few things I'm sitting there going, if I had known everything, I would have lived my life very differently for a couple of situations. But I'm like, I didn't know everything. And you can't beat yourself up for what you don't know, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my facing of the fears, as it were. And anyway, that's my podcast on travel and fear. Check it at the round table. Bye.